My uncle offered me a chance to house sit while he took his family on a European vacation. My aunt and cousin had already left, and once my uncle finished his business, he asked me to look after the place for a few weeks. He knew I longed to live independently, said this was my first taste of it. However, he laid down some strict rules. No friends over, and no spending too much time in the yard. I didn't get why, but I figured he was worried about the heavy snow creating a hazard if I was outside. After a long list of instructions on caring for the house, he left a fridge full of food and departed. Initially, it was even better than I'd imagined. I didn't feel lonely. In fact, I felt a liberating sense of freedom. Everything was perfect, until a noise jolted me awake in the dead of night. More startled than scared, I quickly sat up and peered into the darkness of my uncle's room, which was only lit by the bright moonlight streaming through the window. I glanced outside, wondering if it was snowing. To my surprise, not only was it snowing, but a full-blown blizzard seemed to be raging. I stared, mesmerized by the wild weather, until the same noise echoed from the downstairs front door. That's when my heart really started to pound. I tried to convince myself it was just something blowing against the door, but a shiver ran down my spine. I crept downstairs, flicking on every light as I went, and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Cautiously, I opened the door just a crack, trying to keep the cold and snow out. To my horror, clear footsteps led straight through the snow right up to the door. I slammed it shut and locked it, gasping for breath. Who on earth would be out in this weather? I whispered to myself, frantically looking around the house, trying to figure out what to do. I rushed to the back door, peering through the glass. It was too dark and snowy to see more than a few feet, but through the swirling white, I could have sworn I saw a tiny figure moving away from the house. It looked like a child, no older than 9 or 10. A brief flash of lighting illuminated the scene, confirming it. There was definitely a kid walking around outside. I was terrified, but also deeply worried for the small child. I raced upstairs, grabbed my phone, and called 911 to report the kid near my house. I stayed by the back window, straining to see into the snowy darkness for the child, but they were gone. When the police arrived, I explained the whole situation in more detail from the kitchen. We were interrupted by a soft knock at the front door. One of the officers told me to stay put while he and his partner went to investigate. As the officer opened it, the same child from earlier stood there. The officer, clearly concerned, brought the boy inside. He wasn't wearing a thick jacket or anything suitable for the weather, just a light sweatshirt. The other officer stepped outside, scanning the surroundings before closing the door and rejoining us. The child's expression was unsettling, completely blank. The officer began asking questions. Where were his parents? What was he doing? But the boy barely spoke, seemingly disoriented and lost, as if he couldn't quite grasp what was happening. It felt so surreal playing out right in front of me, yet utterly unbelievable. What kind of child wanders in a blizzard, in the middle of the night? Why did he knock on my door? Why was he alone and devoid of emotion? We wouldn't get answers for weeks. By then, my uncle had returned, and my house-sitting duties were over. In the few words the boy did speak, he had told the investigators that my uncle's house was where he lived. Yet 2 weeks after I found him, another family positively identified the boy as their child, missing for months. This news sent my mind reeling. But things only grew stranger. Less than a month later, another missing child was found sitting on the street in front of my uncle's house, while he was on vacation again. Apparently there's no official connection between the two missing kids, but it felt far too coincidental to me. It made me question everything. Why did my uncle forbid friends, or lingering in the yard? Was he involved in something I didn't know about? Why did he leave days after his family? Was he possibly keeping people somewhere? Of course, I could be completely overthinking it, but who knows? The police had checked the house after the first boy was found, and my uncle was fully cooperative, so it could just be an unbelievable coincidence of two missing children turning up outside his home. Or it might not be a coincidence at all. Winter is my favorite season. There's something about the falling snow and the holidays that always puts me in a great mood. However, I live in a pretty cold state, which means tons of snowfall throughout the winter months. As a part-time DoorDash driver for almost 3 years at the time, this made my job incredibly difficult. Roads took ages to get plowed, and even when they were, heavy snow would quickly cover them again. While it made the job dangerous and sometimes impossible, I usually still chose to drive on days with heavy snow and covered roads. The reason was simple. Nobody else would be out there. Other DoorDash drivers would likely stay home, giving me access to many more orders and the chance to earn significantly more money. Plus, customers tended to tip generously, knowing the effort it took to deliver during a blizzard. That year was no different. It was mid-December when a night of intense snowfall hit. I couldn't start deliveries until 7 or 8, due to my other job, but as soon as I could, I began driving as usual. Very few cars were on the road, and my DoorDash app was lighting up with high-paying offers. I completed 2 relatively quick orders and was on my way back from a house when the snowfall worsened. Visibility was terrible, and the roads weren't being plowed nearly enough. My car wasn't a wreck. It had all-wheel drive and all-season tires, but even it was struggling. I slowed to a stop sign and could barely get moving again, as my tires spun helplessly. Finally, I crept through the intersection when another order popped up on my phone. I stared at it for a second, debating whether to take it, but ultimately rejected it and closed the app. The roads were just too dangerous, even for me. The specific street I was on wasn't far from the main town, so my goal was simply to get as close as possible, hoping more snowplows would have cleared those roads. I drove slowly, crawling at 20 miles. As I navigated the treacherous conditions, I barely made out something large in the middle of the road ahead. I couldn't react in time. I slammed on the brakes, and while my car stopped, the back tires slid out from under me, dragging the vehicle off the road and into a deep layer of snow. Thankfully, it was a soft, low-speed crash, but it didn't change my predicament. My car was completely stuck. I knew I needed help. I took a moment to compose myself, then turned on my hazard lights and grabbed my phone to call roadside assistance. I gave the man my location, and he said it would take about 15 to 20 minutes for him to arrive. I gladly agreed, thanked him, and leaned back in my seat. I was relieved I hadn't accepted any more orders. That would have made this whole situation much more complicated. A few minutes passed as I watched the snow fall. Then I noticed a flickering light in my side mirror. It was faint, but I could make out an orange light, flashing softly, and approach. As it got closer and parked on the side of the road behind me, it looked like a typical work vehicle with caution lights on top. I checked my phone. It had only been 4 minutes since I called. This guy was incredibly early, but I wasn't about to complain about someone showing up quickly to dig me out of a ditch. After waiting in my car for another couple of minutes, I heard a door slam shut behind me, and a man began walking toward my window. Once he was a few feet away, I rolled it down a few inches. "Hi sir, do you need assistance here?" he asked. "Yeah, I called a few minutes ago," I replied. "I just need help getting back on the road." It felt a bit odd explaining myself, as the situation was pretty obvious. "Let me see what I can do for you," the man said, walking around to the back of my car. I assumed he was inspecting it, looking for a place to attach a hook. I'd never seen this done before, but I always imagined they attached a winch to your car and pulled you. I had no idea where they attached it, or if that's even how it actually worked. The man stood behind my car for a bit, as I watched him in my rearview mirror. Suddenly, a rush of cold air blasted through my car as the man yanked open my trunk. I looked back and saw him holding the trunk half open, his eyes scanning the inside of my vehicle. "Sorry," he muttered, slamming the trunk closed again. I didn't know how this process worked, but it was really strange that he just randomly opened my trunk like that. I couldn't think of any reason he'd possibly need to. My suspicions soared. He seemed clueless, and I started putting pieces together. I quickly called the roadside assistance number again. A few rings echoed as I waited anxiously before the same man from the last call picked up. My stomach dropped. "Hey,"
I'm just a couple minutes away. Did you need something else? Just then the guy outside my window came back up to me, telling me he needed my keys and for me to exit the vehicle for a minute. While he prepared it, I kept the phone to my ear, then awkwardly told the guy that I just needed a minute. As I was on the phone, he didn't respond, but just stood there watching me, as if trying to listen to my conversation. I was doing my best not to panic. With the guy still next to my door, I rolled the window up. The man immediately started knocking on the window, asking me what I was doing in a rather aggressive tone. I then locked the doors, and as soon as he heard that click, he tried pulling my door open and began yelling at me. I was terrified, knowing I couldn't go anywhere. As this was going on, I heard another door slam shut from the truck behind me, and saw a second man running towards my car, with something in his hand. Then an extremely loud horn blared from behind us, followed by blinding bright lights, shining directly at my car. The two men ran back to their truck, and immediately sped away, revealing the real roadside assistance truck. Two men got out, and came up to make sure I was okay. Apparently I'd left the call on, and the men had heard what was happening, so they rushed to help. After notifying the police, I found out there were multiple similar cases. Women caught in heavy snowfall, men pretending to be roadside assistants, then stealing their cars and robbing the ice. I wouldn't even doubt if they were the ones who had put that large object in the street that caused me to swerve and slide off the road. I'm incredibly lucky for how the events played out, and I don't think I'll ever drive in bad conditions again. When I was younger, my family and I would often go up north for ice fishing. My parents had friends who owned several cabins in what felt like the absolute middle of nowhere. There was a small gas station about a mile away, but after that, it would take another 20 to 30 minutes to see anything else. On our journey up, snow had begun to fall, and all I wanted was to get settled in and play some games. It was an 8-hour drive to our destination, and we finally arrived around 4 p.m. It was January, so the sun was already beginning to set, and I was pretty tired. We pulled into our cabin's parking lot, and began to unload. The cabins had smart locks, so all you had to do was enter a code, and it would dispense a key to unlock the door. I grabbed my backpack and suitcase and went to input the code, but I noticed there were already tracks leading up to the door. I pointed this out to my dad, and he casually said it was probably just the cleaning person. I took his word for it, and opened the door. Inside I saw a bit of water on the floor, which again I attributed to the cleaning lady. Otherwise the cabin looked fine, and just as I remembered, I went to the room I always stayed in, and started to unpack, but as I went to close the blinds on the window, I saw tracks again. They looked like they were coming from the woods, and heading straight for our house, and judging by the fresh snowfall, they had to be recent. I told my dad, and he said he would check it out. By the time we finished unloading everything though, the snowfall had gone from a light sprinkle to almost a blizzard. My dad said if anyone had been out there, they certainly weren't anymore. If they had any, he made SpaghettiOs for me and my mom. We watched a movie, and then I headed to bed. A few hours later, I was woken by a thumping sound on the wall, right outside my window. I tried to go back to sleep, but it happened a few more times. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was more annoyed. I got up and looked out the window, but saw nothing. The snow had let up a bit, making it easier to see. I noticed the tracks again though, almost in the same spot as the first time, coming from the wood. I made sure the windows were locked before returning to bed, as there wasn't much else I could do. The next day, I told my dad, and he seemed skeptical. We went outside together, and sure enough, there were human footsteps leading from the woods to our cabin, right up to my bedroom window, then to the front door, and then back into the woods. We had been here before, and we knew that besides the cabins, there was nothing for miles, and no one ever really camped in those woods, especially not in winter. My dad called his friends and told them about it, but still no one could really do anything. After a few hours though, they brought over some small cameras that plugged into the wall and offered a live feed of the home. We set them up inside to help us feel safer. It was a bit of a hassle, but better safe than sorry. We left for the lake a few hours later, with my mom constantly checking the cameras to make sure nobody else was inside the cabin. When we reached our fishing spot, we all left our phones in the car for a while. When we got back to the car, My mom had a ton of notifications about the camera sensing movement. My dad immediately called his friend to go check the cabin or call the police. His friend stayed on the line while he went inside the house with some type of... After a few tense minutes of silence, he reported that nothing was there. I know he should have waited for the police, but my dad's friends are just a different kind of tough. He called the police anyway and explained the situation. We didn't get any video proof though, because the cheap cameras only showed a live feed and didn't actually save any footage. We stayed with my dad's friend for the next few nights, but kept the cameras up in the cabin. Sure enough, on the day we were leaving, it sensed movement again. My dad and his friend rushed over there, but again, nothing was inside. But this time, there were fresh tracks leading from the woods to the cabin, the very same tracks I had seen on the first and second day. My dad thought about following the tracks, but my mom urgently told him not. It's a bit eerie to think that someone could have been inside while we were sleeping, or watching us from the windows during the day. Nothing ever came of it, thank God, but it was still one of the creepiest experiences of my life. The next few times we went up there, we stayed in a different cabin, and nothing happened. My dad's friends said they never found out what was going on there, and I guess the person stopped coming after we left.